Most people know you as the host of the show, and they see you wearing a large kippah, but Jews will see it as a kippah. Gentiles won't recognize necessarily that it's a religious item. Are you a religious person?
I'm an Orthodox Jew, and I host on History Digital channel, the digital channel, The Naked Archaeologist. It went into 3 seasons, so they're playing now some 65 episodes, Fridays at 5, I believe, Eastern Time. But they move it around the schedule. It's been very successful. It's been a lot of fun for me because I get paid to run around Israel looking at biblical archaeology, so that's a blessing. I come from the world of investigative journalism, so I bring that into the world of biblical archaeology. We do a lot on obviously on the Hebrew Bible, but we also do stuff on the Gospels, and we're looking at stuff from a historical, not theological point of view. Basically, a lot of the questions are, is there history here, and can we touch it? And and there's a lot of history and Jewish history in the Gospels. For example, we find over 900 tombs in Jerusalem area where secondary burial was practiced. That means somebody, instead of just being buried like today, was buried in a cave, a shroud wrapped around them, a talit, and then a year later they come, the family, they take the bones, they put them in a little coffin called a bone box or an ossuary or a gluskema in Hebrew. Well, the best description of that kind of burial, which we now see, was for about 100 years, say, the burial in Jerusalem, is in the Gospels, the burial of Jesus. It's historically the best step-by-step, taking the body, shrouding it, and so on. So we look at the history, not the theology, and we try to look at it in a way that's accessible to people. We use a lot of archival footage. We have a fun approach. People think that history, the Bible, has to be very serious. And our approach is, hey, this was the entertainment for thousands of years for people. This biblical stories are what Western civilization have been built on. And before the internet and television, this was also entertaining. David and Goliath, that's an exciting story. So we try to bring back the excitement and also the accessibility, because lately with all the academia, you feel you need a PhD to talk about these things. So we try to change that, and thank God we've been successful so far.
To what extent do you feel that your work serves as a validation of biblical stories or biblical beliefs?
Again, as a journalist, I come from the world of investigative journalism. And even though I'm an Orthodox Jew and identify myself as such, as a journalist, I don't go into it looking to validate anything. I'm looking I think we all have, none of us come with nothing in our head. We all have our baggage. I think the difference between validating sounds like you're a propagandist. What I'm trying to do is I'm digging for the truth. I'm trying to find, here's a story, David and Goliath. It supposedly happened here. There were Philistines here. Were there Philistines there, archaeological speaking? Can I find evidence of King David, and so on? So what I'm trying to do is try to either take biblical stories and match them up to the archaeology. That's what I'm trying to do. And if they match, I report that they match. And if they don't match, I say, here are the missing pieces.
Mm-hmm. To what extent?
Like, for example, I made a film, executive produced by James Cameron, called The Exodus Decoded. It aired on the History Channel. It's available on DVD from Associated Producers in Toronto. And we basically went looking for the archaeology of the biblical Exodus, and we found it. We identified, I believe, we made the best argument for Mount Sinai, the real Mount Sinai, that fits the Talmud, that fits the Psalms, that fits the biblical narrative. We found a pharaoh's inscription, a royal signet ring that has the name Yaakov on it. the father of Joseph, who was supposedly number 2 man in the Egyptian hierarchy. So we actually found a spot where the biblical, people think that in the Bible it says they went that away. It doesn't say that. It gives actually 4 coordinates. It says they went to a place called Piachirot, or next to a place called Migdal, next to the sea. It gives you 4 coordinates. Picharoti. It tells you Piachirot in the Torah. We found an inscription that gives the same coordinates on a stone in El Arish that describes the splitting of the sea from an Egyptian point of view. And we actually investigate the science beneath that phenomena. Now people say, science? No, it was God. Of course it was God, but everything is God. So the question is, Maimonides, the Rambam, says that all these miracles have a scientific underpinning because God constructed the world that way. Well, what are the scientific, how does seas split? How are the plagues to be accounted for? So in the Exodus Decoded, we actually give the science and the archaeological proof behind the biblical narrative.
What is happening with the Palestinian Waqf destruction or removal of Jewish archaeological evidence beneath the Dome of the Rock?
Well, in the Naked Archaeologist, I did 2 episodes on the Temple Mount, and it's one of the great tragedies that probably the most important piece of real estate on the planet, the Temple Mount, holy to 3 religions. First and foremost, Judaism, where the temple stood, which was the focus of Judaism, but also important to Christianity. That's where Jesus went and overturned the tables, according to the Gospels, and cried over his prediction that the temple would be destroyed. He cried for that. It was important to him, obviously, as a Jew of the 1st century. And Islam holds it sacred as well. And yet, the Islamic authorities on the Temple Mount are destroying the archaeology beneath it. Professor Gabriel Barkay is sifting through what they're throwing out and finding bits of treasure that has evaded their bulldozers. This is not only a tragedy for the Jewish people, it's a tragedy for the cultural heritage of humanity. Where else can you go and with bulldozers destroy perhaps the most important archaeology in human history? So
why would the Muslims want to destroy biblical proofs underneath the mosque and the church? The Byzantine Church.
Because they see it as a zero-sum game, in the sense that whatever is good for the Jews is bad for the Muslims. That's how they see it. They see it as, we're fighting over this real estate, and if there is proof underneath validating the biblical narrative, the Jews will use that as a way of saying it's ours, not yours. So the best way to deal with historical facts that you don't like, according to them, is to destroy them. And nobody says anything because it's, as you know, it's a sensitive political situation, and let's not get anybody riled up and let them destroy the evidence.
Are they violating any?
They're violating Israeli antiquities laws. I couldn't go back to Israel now and start smashing up archaeology. I'd be arrested and thrown in jail. Nobody can do it.
But wasn't the Omer government permitting this to continue, you think, for political purposes?
I think the world has to become aware of the Temple Mount as a heritage, this place where the Temple of Israel stood for 1,000 years, the first and second temple. It's also important to the world, and we should, I would be upset to find out if somebody started destroying Mayan ruins. I think the world should be upset if somebody is destroying the archaeology beneath the Temple Mount. And I think that steps have to be taken to stop that archaeological destruction. And it's not just there. Synagogue and a beautiful mosaic of King David in Gaza. People forget that Gaza was a center of Jewish life for many, many years. And you had a very important synagogue there with a mosaic of King David, and it's been totally destroyed. It'll never be, it only exists now in photographs. This kind of wanton destruction is deplorable.
What do the archaeological findings contribute to the Zionist argument that that the Zionists have not just come to Israel since the mid 1800s?
Well, I think this is I don't think Jewish people have to prove that they're from Judea. This is nonsense. I think certainly Christians know by reading the Gospels that when Jesus was walking the earth, he didn't live in a place called Palestine. He lived in a Jewish state, Judea, with its capital in Jerusalem. And I think people know that. Muslims know that. Everybody knows that. I think that the attempt to politicize ancient history, where today you can't, in some broadcasters won't let you use the word ancient Israel because that's taking sides. So suddenly people are calling ancient Israel Palestine when it wasn't called that. It was only called Palestine by the Romans, not by the Arabs. 600 years before the Arabs came, as a way of sticking it to the Jews after the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135, when the Romans finally put down the Jews. They said, now we're going to call your country by the name of the now extinct Philistines. And they called it Palestina. There were no Philistines at that point anymore. So it was a name that was imposed on the area by the enemies of the Jews for anti-Semitic reasons. Now, I'm not saying that today there aren't a people that identify as Palestinians, but I'm saying to try to rewrite ancient history so as to politicize it, to make it part of the modern debate, is crazy. And I don't think that Jews should be in a defensive position where they have to prove to anyone that we come from Judea. We obviously do.
But Judea is
ancient Judea is modern Israel. I mean, not exactly geographically. The so-called West Bank is part of it, but it's that area, Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, that is the cradle of Jewish civilization. And as a result, the cradle of the three great religions of the Western world.
How do these archaeological findings help reinforce your spirituality?
I don't look to archaeology for proof of God, but we come from a tradition where these are not myths. This is history. The Exodus from Egypt is history. So I find that when I touch, right, when I actually physically touch something that existed, that might have been touched by Moses, when I actually come into physical contact with the Bible, with the Torah, it's an amazing thrill. But it's not as if, before I touched it, I was an unbeliever, and then I touch it and I become a believer. It just contextualizes. It gives it a physical presence. It brings the past into today. And it also provides insight. I go back to the Torah narrative, and suddenly I understand it better. I'll give you a very practical example. We tend to think of Moshe, looking at Pharaoh and says, let my people go, and there's one Pharaoh. But the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, call Pharaoh by 2 different names: King of Egypt, Melech Mitzrayim, and Pharaoh, Paro. Now, today we know there's a difference between a prime minister and a president. We would never confuse these 2 things. We wouldn't say, oh, that's, the prime minister of Canada is not a president, and in Israel there's a prime minister, Netanyahu, and there's a president, Peres. They're not the same person. Same thing with the title. If you know Egyptology, King of Egypt and Pharaoh are 2 different people. They're 2 different titles. Sometimes you can wear both crowns. They fit physically into each other. Anybody who saw Cleopatra with Elizabeth Taylor, they fit into each other. So sometimes you could be Pharaoh, like you could be defense minister and prime minister in Israel. You hold that portfolio. So by just tracking the Torah story and seeing when Pharaoh is called Paro, when Paro is called Melech Mitzrayim, king of Egypt, and when he's called Paro Melech Mitzrayim, you go, wow, here there's two different people, here there's one person, and it's unarguable because certainly the Jews living in Egypt knew the difference between king of Egypt and Paro. They're two different titles. So that's an example where history and archaeology actually forces us to look back at the biblical story and understand it in a deeper way.
Do you suppose that the channel...
Is this the
last
yeah.
question, yeah. The channels which you're on, are they looking to cater to a religious bent, do you think?
I don't provide a religious bent. I provide a... I think we shouldn't ghettoize things that are biblical. You know, pyramids in Egypt, wow, that's history. But, you know, the palace of David, well, that's a religious story. You know, what I do is I bring the tools of investigative journalism into the realm of biblical archaeology. That's what I do, and I report on it. And I think there's no more exciting reportage, there's no bigger headline than if you find something. If you identify the real Mount Sinai, when we identified the lost tomb of Jesus, I mean, that was front page news. And why? Because people care. And you have to live by the same rules, which are good journalism. I'm not an academic. I don't have to live by the rules of academia. I have to live by the rules of good journalism. We live in a democratic society, and journalism is important. And we're used to journalism being part of politics and sociology and all of that stuff. But in the realm of biblical archaeology, it's been religion and don't touch it, and just follow some professor or some minister, you know, or some rabbi and just nod a lot. What we do is we actually report. And because we report, our reportage, I think, our stories, are some of the most exciting stories being reported on today.
We're in Los Angeles, but you're on your way where?
I'm on my way home to Israel.
And what will you...
My office is in Toronto. I have offices in Toronto and in Israel. And, you know, I commute, as many people do. I've gotten... it's been tremendous being part of the Canadian film industry. And I've gotten support from the broadcasters in Canada, Israel, the United States, and I've been able to do what I love to do. You know, when somebody actually, when your work is your pleasure, right? Then what greater blessing can there be?
Will you embark now on a new production cycle?
Always have to be on something, because if I don't, this is what I do for a living. If daddy stops working, you know, the kids stop eating, so I better keep...
Are you married?
I'm married and I have 5 kids, yeah, I think, ranging in age from 6 to 17, and 4 girls, 1 boy, and I'm doing my thing.
Where are they living?
At home with me, in Israel, yeah.
In Israel?
Yeah.
Oh, I think people would enjoy knowing that.
Yeah, I live in Israel.
And you raise your family in Israel?
We raise our family where we live, yeah. I mean, it's not so amazing. There's millions of people living in Israel, and more and more are coming from the United States and Canada every day, from France. And today, you know, with today's technology, you have more and more people that, you know, live in Israel and work in Paris or Los Angeles. I know people who commute to Los Angeles. It's a long flight, I have to say, but they do it. And we live in a sometimes in a virtual world. And part of the good things about that is that you know, you can have your cake professionally and eat it too. So I got to catch an airplane back home to Israel, so I got to go. Thank you.